afternoon, everyone. House Taxation Committee meeting will come to order. First item of business would be requests for bill introductions. Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Tax Committee. Representative Tori Marie Arnberger and I am introducing 22 RS 2970, which is the Right to Start Act.
Care to elaborate just a little bit? What are we starting?
The Right to Start Act, it is just dealing with entrepreneurships, removing some of the red tape, and then on top of it, there's a tax incentive portion of it.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Representative Helgerson? No? Any objection? Seeing none, the request is approved. Representative Helgerson for a bill introduction.
Mr. Chairman, 22 RS 3213 is a bill that deals with establishing a tax credit for not-for-profit corporations for disability concerns.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Any objection? Seeing none, the request is approved. Further requests for bill introductions?
Thank you, Chairman, Tax Committee. John Monroe with 1861 Consulting. And I'd like to request introduction of RS 3200 relating to the sales tax exemption on rental cars.
Thank you. Committee, are there any questions? Could you repeat the last part, please?
The sales tax exemption on rental cars.
Sales tax exemption on rental cars. Seeing no questions, is there any objection to the request? Seeing none, the request is approved. Thank you. Any further requests for bill introductions? Seeing none, committee, we will move on to our first item of business for the day, and is a hearing on House Bill 2719. And would first turn to the reviser for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2719 would include telecommunications, machinery and equipment placed in inventory or work in progress as part of the defined term telecommunications, machinery and equipment that is currently exempt from property taxation under statute. So essentially, such equipment, when they're either in inventory and work in progress, would now qualify for the property tax exemption.
Question, Representative Gardner.
Adam, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have the bill in front of me, but explain a little bit that the existing language was passed back in, 2006 or something like that, around that point in time. Does that sound right?
Probably correct. I don't have the date in front of me of when the original exemption came into effect.
And this would just expand to include the work in progress inventory to be exempt. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So today it's not.
As I understand the current
for all telecommunications companies, equipment.
I'd probably have to defer to them. There any other interpretation of how the exemption will apply, but it's my understanding that they're having an issue here that this equipment until it becomes part of the overall structure is subject to property tax.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
Seeing no further questions, Adam, is this the shortest memorandum you've ever prepared in tax? One sentence.
Yep.
All right, thank you for that. I would now turn to the Department of Revenue for an overview on the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue is estimating a decrease in assessed value from the exemption totaling approximately $4.8 million. The potential impact is a decrease in funds to the statewide school fund of $96,000 and to the educational building fund of $4,800 and the state institutions building fund of $2,400. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. Could you elaborate a little bit on how you arrived at that 4.8?
I cannot, but I
Okay.
do have the experts out here in the audience from the Division of Property Valuation, if you would be,
Yes, I'd welcome
Amenable
just
to
a
that.
brief explanation if
Okay.
possible.
Kevin? Kevin Salter with the Department of Revenue would.
Thank you.
I haven't been here for a while.
There you are.
This is an estimate, best estimate that we could have done. When the utility companies file with us, they don't identify telecommunications machinery and equipment in the materials and supplies or CWIP. It's just a flat dollar amount. So in the estimate that we did, we just took the total materials and supplies in Kansas, total CWIP in Kansas, and worked it through the formula to determine the drop in its taxable assessed value. So that's how we got to the 4.8.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Committee, are there any further questions for Department of Revenue? Representative Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So is every telephone provider have this same issue, or is where the inventory or whatever is subject to property tax and what's in the ground or on the poles is not? I mean, does this apply to everyone?
Everyone that's included as public utilities. I did the estimate based on the 2021 tax year filings. And there was 131 companies that we valued that year that had CWIP or materials and supplies in Kansas.
So can I ask one more? So are there other companies other than communication companies that are exempt from property tax on?
No,
No, so this would only apply to communication or telephone, these 131 companies, but a non-telephone company or communications company, they would still be subject to the,
yes.
okay.
The railroads get equalized, but beyond that, it's just, the bill was written, the original bill 79-224 broke out telecommunications, machinery and equipment and gave a definition what it was. And same way with the railroads.
So, okay, so this would make them exempt, but other companies that would have products specific to their industry would still pay
That's
property tax.
all electrics, pipelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. Thank you, sir, for being here. You mentioned public utility in your remarks earlier. So are you saying, according to this definition, are they a public utility or not, or?
Could you repeat that? I'm old.
But you had mentioned public utility earlier. So do they have to be classified as a public utility as far as property tax is concerned to fit in the statute, to be under the statute?
Yes, the original bill only spoke to telecommunications, which are by definition or by statute public utilities, except for cellular telephones. We had a Supreme Court ruling that said cellular telephones are not public utilities.
Right, and they're, Mr. Chairman, they are public utilities are state assessed, correct? At 33%, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
So, but we have some telecommunications companies that aren't assessed at 33%. They're assessed at, I believe, 25% commercial rates, correct? Or am I wrong?
Not a traditional landline company. They're all 33%. I'm not sure which companies you're referring to that would not be a public utility.
For example, I I guess, is a cable company a public utility?
A,
Cable company?
the one right off the top of my head, Cox Communications, which is basically a cable company that turned into a phone company, turned into an internet company. Yes, they are state assessed.
At 33%.
Yes. On
Just-
the business of telephone only. Internet.
Everything else
cable
is broken
done
out.
locally at 25%. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you for that clarification. Representative Corbett?
Thank you. Basically, is this bill just dealing with just inventory taxes?
Yes. And construction work in progress.
So if other people had inventory and other businesses, are they being taxed currently?
Local assessed companies, the inventory is exempt. If I remember the timing of all these statutes back in 2006, but all public utility inventories and CWIP are accessible for taxes.
Thank you.
Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. We kind of put, oh,
Thank you.
Representative Kelly again. Yes.
That, just to follow up, could I ask you if the public utilities, their inventory would be one thing, but say that I'm a manufacturing company and my inventory and work in progress, does it have property tax on it?
I would, this is kind of a guess on my part because I'm not a county appraiser, but I would think whatever's visible on site on January 1st, that's the lien date, they would try to put a value on that.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just follow up, are you talking about like the raw goods for creating the, or what are you defining? Are you talking about like manufactured good, the raw goods, the materials that go into that, or the inventory?
I was just wondering if the telecommunications, if it's their work in progress and their inventory, if this would not tax it, if I had a company that didn't fall in the communications equipment, but I had the same, had inventory work in process, would I pay property tax on it? And so it seemed like the answer might be that yes, I would, and this one group would not. So that's what I was trying to figure out.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, we will open up the conferees, first section proponent testimony, and welcome to committee Daniel Friesen, Chief Innovator Officer at Idea Tech. Welcome to committee.
Is this on?
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I appreciate the time to be here today. I'm Daniel Friesen, Chief Innovations Officer at Idea Tech. We're a fiber broadband builder in the state of Kansas. I wish everyone was here to talk about tax and broadband today, but I think there's some other food tax items on the issue today. But appreciate some of the complexity associated with this conversation, and I thought I might start a little bit just talking through some of the conversation that's already taken place here. Generally, this Idea Tech brought this bill to you based on our experience. We think there are other small business broadband providers that may be having the same experience. And we don't think this is an expansion of a tax exemption at all. We really think this is a technical correction to the original intent of the original bill. I think there was some history already given related to a couple of statutes that were intended to foster investment in the state with equipment purchases. KSA 79224 is the amendment, the statute we're suggesting to amend. Its sister statute 79223 is a much broader statute that I think most businesses in the state are aware of, and that generally exempts all purchases of new equipment from personal property tax across all industries. And it's, I think, one of the more impactful tax exemptions that all businesses get to experience here in the state. And, I might just read a little bit from both statutes. It says, it is the purpose of this section to promote, stimulate, foster, and encourage new investments in commercial and industrial machinery and equipment in the state of Kansas. And that's in 223, 224, related telecommunications essentially says the same thing. It also says to enhance business opportunities, encourage the expansion of businesses, and promote economic stability. Again, from a technical perspective, we don't think this is an expansion. It's merely clarifying one thing, and I know there was some questions already on what that is and what inventory is and what work in progress is. And to explain it, we have to explain a little bit how we're different than a manufacturer who might, purchase a large piece of equipment that's exempt from tax. As a utility, we typically purchase components of a larger asset and then build that asset out, and that takes time. And when those components are pending deployment, or when they're in process of being deployed, they're either in inventory or in work in progress on our balance sheet. When those assets show up on that particular line item on our balance sheet, they will trigger property tax. And it's of our opinion that was not the intent of this exemption, given those assets are in the pipeline and they're going to be placed into service. We believe those particular assets should be exempt from property tax as well. So that's generally the situation we have here in 223, where you have it broadly applying to all industries. I don't think you have this problem because they're not assessed at the state level, and there's a little more sophistication that occurs at the state level and how that's reported. I think generally speaking, and I think there was some comments earlier related to inventory, may not be assessed property tax in the first place. It's really not a visible item in assessors typically, I believe. And so, we just wanted to, again, remind the committee of the original intent of this bill. And we feel like we're actually at a disadvantage compared to other businesses simply because of the way we put together our assets and deploy them. And so I hope that clarifies that. And I don't want to distract this issue at all. But at the same time, we wanted to, I think, Mr. Chairman, he gave us a little bit of latitude to speak real briefly on House Bill 2499, which was in front of you, I believe, last week, and that was the sales tax refund for the purchase of broadband equipment. We're a big proponent of that as well. I think it sounds like there was less than enthusiasm from this committee on that bill when it was presented originally. We wanted to add maybe a different perspective on that bill. I think perhaps it was looked at as just another handout, and there really wasn't a need for that particular incentive. And we would suggest and maybe offer some sort of amendment to that bill that focused it in areas that do need further incentivization, specifically underserved parts of the state that are defined as underserved from a broadband perspective. These are areas that have very poor business cases today for broadband deployment, and they do require subsidization to resolve those issues. And so one way or another, if we want to resolve those issues, we either have to incentivize through, pure cash subsidies, or look at innovative ways to reduce broadband providers' costs. And this is one of those ways. And so I think perhaps it might be a little more palatable to the committee if some suggestions were made, and we'd be happy to make those suggestions related to focusing on small business and perhaps rural and underserved areas, and providing that incentive there. So again, just turning back to this particular bill, 2719, it is a problem we're having. It is putting us at a disadvantage, and we feel like we're not on the same playing field as others that have a similar exemption. And so we'd appreciate some clarity through this 13-word amendment to the statute. With that, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. My first question is, do you have an estimate or an estimation on what the dollar amount would be to your company? I know we heard from Department of Revenue on kind of how they came to the fiscal note on what they estimated. Do you have a number for us?
And I don't even want to begin to try to explain how this is calculated, because it's very complicated, and we feel like the calculation is actually, given this is one component of our business, a little unfair in and of itself. But generally, from a cash perspective, we may pay $50,000 a year. We're concerned that will increase over time substantially as the more and more work product that we have in place as we continue to expand our business is going to grow with that. And so we see it expanding over time.
Representative Prail.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. I guess my question, I'm still confused on whether it's machinery and equipment. Like with your business, would that include fiber that you haven't put in the ground yet?
Yes, sir. There's some definitions in the statute related to that. And I believe the statute starts with machinery, equipment, and then down further, there's a machinery and equipment means, and there's a broad list of items, including cables and equipment.
Okay, but if this is passed, then you would not have to pay it on that as when it's just in inventory. That's the whole crust of this, right?
Maybe I misunderstood you, but if this is passed, when it's work in progress, or in inventory waiting to be deployed, that particular piece that's on that part of our balance sheet would no longer be taxed. And it's a small portion, but again, all of what we put in the ground today is already exempt, and so this just equalizes the part that's on its way to being put in the ground.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next on the list is Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm familiar with a regulated kind of utility approach to work in process. So as you say, as you buy things, you set up a work order, and then you buy the things to build whatever that work order is designed, and then it gets put into plant at the point that it's put in service, right? So you're not a regulated utility, correct?
We are in a small portion of our business. I think Department of Revenue gave the example of Cox as another entity. They're a broadband provider. They provide telephone service. We're a broadband provider. That telephone service that we provide is a regulated component of our business.
So do you use a similar approach where you accumulate things in a work order system of some kind, and then when it goes in service is when you put it in the plant?
We do in a way, but it's not near as sophisticated as a multi-billion-dollar company. And that's part of the challenge is I think we're getting this particular issue may be a rounding error for some of the bigger entities, but it's a big deal for us. And so we've heard a question a few times, like, why is this an issue? Well, again, we feel like it doesn't fit the intent, and it's significant expense to us that we feel like puts us at a little bit of a disadvantage. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. So,
Okay.
so things sit on that work in process for varying lengths, depending on how big the job is before it eventually goes into service. And that's the window of time that you're saying you're getting assessed for property tax. And how often do they assess that? Is that an annual assessment?
So it's just an annual capture at a certain point in time. And so, that particular year's asset will undoubtedly roll off the books the following year. But there's always new construction in place. And so it really, again, it impacts new investment, and it's a disadvantage to new investment.
Okay, good. Can I ask one more? So, and you've said a couple of times that it puts you at a disadvantage, but it seems like all the players in this space have the same set of rules, whether they're, so who is when you say you're at a disadvantage to others that have a similar, so who are you in a disadvantage?
That's a fair point. If we look at all telecommunications providers equally, I think I would agree with you. If we look at broadband providers that don't have this kind of regulated arm, I think that puts us at a disadvantage with them. And then if we look at generally how the intent of the statutes were to give this to all industry, and how we've kind of isolated telecommunications, and with this particular wording, I think it brings 224 back into, I think, more of what 223 is saying.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Corbett.
Thank you. The question I'm trying to get around out is when do you actually get taxed to 33%?
Every year, there's just a point in time when the filing is due, and I think I couldn't give you I'll just give you an example. So if the filing is due in June, it's probably for the previous fiscal year. And so whatever's on the balance sheet at that fiscal year is what's going to be taxed.
And if this bill passes, that would eliminate that 33% tax on your inventory?
That's going to be placed into exempt status, yes.
And the thing where I'm going with this is it seems like one of the rules of thumb I always thought is you'd always kind of tax the end user.
Yeah.
And the trouble is, if you want this state to grow, which is seemingly hard to get across, is you have to have inventory, and if you're penalized for kind of getting your stuff ready to expand, you don't bring it in. I think by not passing this bill is very not forward thinking. I think it'll hurt the state if it's not passed.
Thank you. We agree.
Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I kind of follow up with Representative Turner. He answered part of my question. And that work in progress would be on an annual basis, or is when that machinery is completed off that balance sheet, or would that, if you start a new project with that same machinery, would that be considered a work in progress? Or just follow up on that if you would.
It's kind of rolling. So, and it's a snapshot. So let's just say the snapshot is December 31st, and we have $1 million worth of new assets that we're deploying that is not yet in service. That's going to be the amount that's taxed, $1 million. Next year, that's likely going to be placed into service, and so that $1 million drops off. There's likely going to be another, maybe $2 million this year that's in the next year. Does that help?
Yeah, that is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, we also have written testimony from Michael Ruffin with AT&T. Is there anyone else wishing to appear on House Bill 2719? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 2719 and move on to House Bill 2711. Now, committee and audience, we have two hearings on two food sales tax bills. We will do each of the hearings one at a time. But if you are speaking to one bill and you wish to address your comments for both bills, please feel free to do that, just to save a little time and be efficient. But I would turn to the revisor's office for an overview on 2711.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2711 would lower sales and compensating use tax, the general rate to 6.3%. Currently, it's set at 6.5%. And this would apply for all sales. And then additionally, it would lower the sales tax and compensating use tax for food and food ingredients to 3.5%. Those go into effect July 1 of 2022. Additionally, there would be a possible additional reductions to the rate of food and food ingredients in out years. The bill would allow for the continued levying of tax, city and county tax, and the Washburn, the tax levied by Washburn University. So those would be continued on food and food ingredients. Additionally, the non-refundable food sales tax income tax credit would be made refundable. However, this credit would be discontinued if or when the sales state rate on food and food ingredients would be lowered to 0%. And then going quickly through the actual sections in the bill. Section 1 establishes the rate of food and food ingredients at 3.5%. Additionally, such sales would not include prepared food. Section 2 would lower the state rate for sales tax on food and food ingredients by 1.2%. And this would commence July 1, 2023 for any fiscal year in which the budget stabilization fund, has $100 million or more on July 1. And then for the next, starting January 1 of the following year, the rate of tax on food and food ingredients would be lowered by 1.2%. Sections 3 and 4 would continue sales tax for city and counties and the tax levied by Washburn University. Section 5 would be the food sales income tax credit currently in existence would be made refundable. Additionally, this credit would be discontinued in the event that the sales state rate of food and food ingredients would be 0%. Additionally, Section 6 would amend the definition section. I believe, as Representative Smith noted, I may have made a error when drafting. So certain provisions, the bottled water, the candy, dietary supplements, food sold through vending machines, soft drinks, probably should have been included and not excluded. So happy to prepare an amendment for technical amendment for when the bill gets worked. Section 7 and 9 would lower the general sales and compensating use tax for all sales to 6.3%. Then lastly, sections 8 and 10 would adjust the state highway fund distribution that currently exists. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Adam. Committee, are there any questions for the reviser? Yes, Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sections 8 and 10, when you say it will be adjusted, does that mean you're going to keep the amount they are receiving now, or are you going to adjust it down? What's the bill say?
It was my intent when we drafted the bill to make the adjustment to increase the portion that goes to the state highway fund to essentially hold it harmless on the first cut. However, after the state rate on food goes to 3.5, it does not make subsequent cuts as that goes to 0 from 3.5. So there's just one adjustment to the highway fund.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you for presenting on this. So my question is, how many years would this take to get us to 0? I realize it's probably a hypothetical based on that one contingency, but what's the likelihood? How soon do you suppose? Because how soon is now? I'd like it now. So tell me more.
By my calculations, the first, it goes to 3.5 currently, or July 1 of this year. The earliest it could drop by 1.2% would be January 1 of 2024. So then 25, 26, I believe would at the earliest it could be at 0%, assuming that the other conditions are met.
And do we have, and I know I might be pushing it a little bit to kind of speculate here on the likelihood that those conditions are met. How often have we in the past met those conditions just on average?
I would have to defer to someone else. I'm not aware of.
I don't believe we ever have had, because the last deposit into the budget stabilization fund was $82 million, I believe, and it was in there for 1 year, and it was used.
I have a teenage boy in my house and I spend like $600 a month on groceries. So was just trying to find out. Thank you.
Representative Corbett.
On sections 3 and 4, how hard is that going to be to administer with food ingredients and the food sales? And how hard will this be for retailers and whatever in grocery stores to implement this bill?
That might be something for the conferees or perhaps Department of Revenue. I'm not sure the revisor could.
I'll save that question for
if he wants to try. I'm more than willing to.
I'm sorry,
I
I
have my knowledge base.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not difficult. It's all computerized and it's just a matter of programming. It's not a major change at all.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for that overview. Now ask Department of Revenue to come forward and review the fiscal note, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. We are estimating that House Bill 2711 would reduce state revenues by $333.5 million in fiscal year 2023. In fiscal year 2024, it would be $437.8 million, and in fiscal year 2025, it would be $540.3 million. We are assuming that 15% of all of the current sales tax collections are collected on food and food ingredients. And we've also made the assumption in our estimate that the budget stabilization fund balance threshold outlined in the bill would be met each year, reducing the state sales tax rate on the food and food ingredients. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kathleen. Committee, any questions for Department of Revenue? Representative Helgerson.
Today, we had in the Appropriations Committee a discussion about the financial cost of reducing the sales tax to zero, that it was going to cost us an additional 8 employees with seems like $200,000 or $300,000. Since this is staggered several years, would the estimate be for the original amount, or would you have to go back in and reprogram, causing additional employees each year to do the additional cost? So how does that work? Because it was real surprising to me, as you might have heard, that suddenly for less collections, it was going to cost us so much money.
Mr. Chairman, we did estimate, we've got an administrative cost of $287,000, I believe, in fiscal year 2022 to go ahead and get the programming done. And then we have an additional amount in fiscal year 2023 of $525,000 and 8 new positions. That would be continuing on to fund those 8 positions within the department year after year after year. So that would continue on. As the rates go down, we do have to program and notify all of the retailers each time the rate does go down. So that might cause just a little bit of confusion, but if it's fairly simple in the point of sale system for these retailers, then maybe they won't have a problem. But we'll need to be able to educate the retailers each time the rate reduction is taken.
So if I could summarize, only 8 employees are going to be added during this period, whether or not it's 1 time or 3 times, different adjustments or however long it takes. And there'll be different additional programming costs, though, in this period.
You are correct.
Thank you.
Kathleen, if I could go back to Representative Corbett's question earlier a little bit. I think I asked you this on when we heard had the hearing on 2484 and 2487. It's now March 2nd. If we make these changes on July 1st, what kind of time frame are we up against, and what does that do to the Department of Revenue? If it's the end of March, if it's into May, into veto session, if this is implemented, what kind of turnaround time is reasonable for the department?
We really need 60 to 90 days in order to implement this. Let's take, if it were passed May 1 to be effective July 1, we'd have 60 days and we would work to go ahead and get that done. Our streamline agreement provides that we need to give the retailers at least 30 days when we have a state rate change and 60 days if we're going to have a local rate change. Now, one advantage per se that maybe the Kansas Department of Revenue would have is that the first return for these filers won't be due until August 25th. So we've got a little bit of time to work with that.
Thank you. Committee, Representative Helgerson.
I apologize. If some of us are leaning toward the idea of delaying either the full sales tax reduction on food, either the complete amount or the partial, is there a better time to start it? Meaning, is it better to start at January 1, July 1, and for ease of the vendors and for the ease of the department?
We have to begin on a calendar quarter.
Okay.
So, and we need at least 30 to 60 days to notify our retailers that there's going to be a change in the rate.
Okay, but if it was 6 months out, just follow the same quarter, starting on a quarter basis, and at least, you said 3 months?
60 to 90 days, yes.
60 to 90 days. Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, committee? Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you gave us this information before, Kathleen, when we tried to reduce food sales tax 3-4 years ago. We wanted to give all of the income from marketplace facilitators online and put it towards that. And then you gave us a number of how much it's been since we've started collecting that extra tax.
With the marketplace facilitators, right now we're collecting probably around $12 to $13 million a month from the marketplace facilitators.
That's a month.
Mm-hmm. And that does include state and local.
So had we gone ahead and passed that tax statement, that tax bill that had that in it, we would be already reducing food sales tax with a dedicated funding source. Yes?
I'm not sure which bill you're speaking of.
SB 22, 4 years ago.
And I believe so, yes, yes.
I just think this is such a huge cut into revenues of the state. It is not smart to not figure out a dedicated funding source. Let's decide what other program are we going to cut? What are we going to do? If we'd done it 4 years ago, we could have been doing this all along, and you would have had we would have been taking care of this, and no one would have noticed. At least not in Kansas so much. So I tell us where we're going to get this money. Where are we going to take the money from? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions for Department of Revenue? Seeing none, thank you, Kathleen. Committee, we will now turn to our proponent section and welcome first to committee, Andrea Clark. Welcome to committee.
Hello, thank you, Chairman Smith. I would like to speak to 2711 and 2720 while I share some comments. My name is Andrea Clark. I'm Planning and Policy Manager at KC Healthy Kids, and we host the Greater Kansas City Food Policy Coalition. We've been working on eliminating the Kansas food sales tax since 2014. And in that time, we've seen bipartisan support overwhelmingly since we've been working on it. In the last several years especially, we've seen food insecurity rates rise in our region and across the state. We've also seen state revenue rise over the last year or two as well. And Kansas really need a break. They need a tax break for just everyday people. What we like about 2711 is that there's refundability until it's fully eliminated. Based on budget estimates that we've seen, the state can afford to cover the bill based on increasing revenue. What we like about 2720 is that it's full elimination of the sales tax as soon as possible. We do have one question though about the SNAP definition of food and if that would violate the streamlined sales tax agreement. So we just want Kansans to have a tax break when they go to the grocery store. Eliminating the tax is the quickest way for Kansans to see an effect on their checking account. That money that they save in state sales tax, they're going to spend on buying more food. It's going to stay in the local economy. We know it's good for low-income shoppers. We know it's good for grocers, especially ones along state lines that border other states like Colorado that have 0% sales tax on food. Even Missouri is talking about eliminating its remaining about 1.25% of food sales tax. So it's good for rural grocers, and we have the revenue to do it right now. So let's get it done. Questions?
Committee, I think we'll take questions at the end of the conference. So we'll go through all of the proponents and then we'll take questions after that. Thank you for your testimony. Next, I'd like to welcome Emily Fetch with Kansas Action for Children.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith and members of the committee. I'm Emily Fetch, the Director of Fiscal Policy at Kansas Action for Children. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 2711. I spoke in front of your committee a few weeks ago on two other food sales tax bills, and at the time I shared that KAC is in strong support of the concept of eliminating the state-level food sales tax. But I also said that the full elimination would be costly and that we needed to make sure that we continued to monitor the state's revenue position to ensure that the state could maintain services without this revenue source in both the short and the long term. Since I last spoke in front of the committee, things have changed. An expensive tax incentive bill has been enacted, and while there are lots of unknowns about how this bill might affect revenue streams, or even if the company is going to come to Kansas and that money needs to be used, KAC is concerned that the bill has made it more difficult to pass the full elimination of the state-level sales tax on food without potentially creating problems in the state budget in the next few years, which is why we're not weighing in on 2720 and a full elimination bill at this time. Kansas Action for Children is disappointed that full elimination, which can help Kansans pay for groceries, is not currently prudent while ensuring that the state maintains its fiscal health in the long term. Given this change, we believe the gradual reduction of the state-level food sales tax while ensuring a minimum balance in the Budget Stabilization Fund is the most responsible and sustainable path forward. We appreciate that House Bill 2711 has an effective date of July 1st, which means families will benefit sooner from this policy. We also really appreciate the reinstatement of the refundability of the food sales tax credit. We believe this is a vital component of the bill, as it will make sure lower income families are able to keep food on the table and see the benefit of this policy change. Kansas Action for Children prioritizes helping families get food on the table, and we would prefer if this bill focused exclusively on food sales tax rather than include the reduction of the overall sales tax. As you can see in my written testimony, this change primarily benefits higher income Kansans. And we've also seen a range of estimates about the cost of that provision, so we're concerned about the fiscal note of that component as well. In addition, we would prefer that the Budget Stabilization Fund continue to grow. As was mentioned earlier, often it has $0 in it, and there was the first deposit made. I know that the governor's budget proposal suggests a $600 million deposit in the Budget Stabilization Fund, and I think having that amount of money and maintaining it would be a really responsible fiscal step. In addition, we would also encourage the committee to consider that in addition to the minimum of the Budget Stabilization Fund, a food sales tax elimination could also be contingent on meeting a 7.5% ending balance, which House Bill 2616 suggests. But overall, we're supportive of House Bill 2711. Kansas Action for Children is eager to find the right balance of fiscally responsible strategies for Kansas families while also addressing the second highest food sales tax in the country. And I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next conferee is Mike Kelly. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I'm representing the Kansas Council of Chapters of the Military Officers Association of America. We advocate for veterans. We advocate for the National Guard. We advocate for their families. Kansas has a proud tradition of supporting the currently serving and formerly serving members of the military. Elimination of the sales tax on food would further extend the proud tradition of supporting the troops and their family. Earlier this year, this committee passed HB 2467, which would adjust the taxation of currently serving military people. We really appreciate that. This bill, 2711, would extend that support for the military and for veterans. Last year, a coalition of Kansas veterans groups met, and we looked at what made Kansas attractive and unattractive to veterans. One of the top issues that was mentioned was the high sales tax on food. And previous conferee mentioned it's the second highest of any jurisdiction. I can't confirm or deny that, but it's high. Our top legislative priority for MOAA, Kansas Council of Chapters, remaining before this committee, is eliminating the sales tax on food. We urge you to sweep aside the other issues that are getting pulled into this discussion and the other partisan things that are occurring around this issue. We urge you to keep focused on the main effort, which is to eliminate the sales tax on food. Doing so over a number of years, based on some fiscal milestones, is a reasonable approach. And we support HB 2711. This bill won't only support veterans, it will support every family that shops at our Kansas grocers. We need to do this. We urge you to pass 2711. Thank you, and I'll stand by for questions after we're done.
Thank you, committee. That concludes our proponent section that I have for in-person testimony, and I will now open it up for questions. Representative Gardner.
Of course, I have one, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I guess this question is for Emily, please. Emily, you were talking about the refundability on the credit. Of course, we have today in existence a non-refundable credit, and a lot of people can't really take advantage of that because they don't have any tax liability. My question, I guess, is the way I read this bill, that it's set at $30,615 worth of income. So if I have 4 dependents or a family of 4, is it correct I'm going to receive $125 per dependent?
I think that's my understanding. It's based on what it would be on the federal return, is my understanding. Yes.
Okay, so that would be $500. At the end of the year, I'd file, I'd get $500. Plus, I would get 3% of my food cost, which for a family of four, I equated that at $600 at, I think it's $18 per month. So that family is going to receive $216 during the year of savings and $500 refundable. Get a check from the state. I guess my question is, are you, it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, that we've established a new tax cliff. Because if I have a family of four making $31,000, 400 and whatever that is, over the amount, I don't receive that $125. And the only benefit I get is the $216 on savings from the sales tax reduction. Is that, am I calculating that correct? And does that seem fair?
The 30,615 or whatever it is a static number, and it's been the same since, I don't know when, but the past many years. So it doesn't take into account, so there is the cliff issue. It also doesn't take into account inflation. So it keeps that, number low, which would just gradually reduce who's eligible over time. And then in addition, you mentioned kind of tax liability, and I do think it's important, I think, when talking about the refundability of the food sales tax credit, that it's the tax liability with income. So it doesn't take into account those lower income folks and how much they pay in taxes, because they pay a huge chunk of their income in other taxes like sales tax and property taxes.
Okay, wouldn't, in your mind, I mean, with that possible tax cliff, which we know exists, wouldn't it be better just to lower it to zero right off the bat and repeal this refundability thing altogether, and then everybody's on a level playing field, receives the total benefit?
Well, I would agree conceptually that full elimination would be ideal. I think that Kansas Action for Children is concerned right now with all of the unknown variables around both the Apex bill and as well as other things. So what else might be kind of on the docket in the rest of the legislative session? That the gradual reduction right now, I think, is kind of the most responsible path forward. But things could change. Again, like, we don't know necessarily what's going to happen with that Apex company. So I think things could potentially look very different in, 30, 45 days, whatever that timeline might look like.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, do you know, Emily, what the inflation rate on food is right now?
I don't know if
I believe it's 7.5%, and that doesn't count February, I believe. So in my mind, if you can give people a 6.5% reduction right off the get-go, right at the beginning, that helps that inflation. But just a comment, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Emily.
I'll see your comment and raise you one. Emily, would it also not be beneficial to just eliminate the lower tax bracket of 3.1%?
To fully eliminate?
Yes.
I'd have to look at.
If we're giving money back, let's give it all back.
I would have to I'd have to run that. I'm not going to answer that right off the top of my head. I'd have to look at the numbers.
It was a rhetorical question, I guess. Representative Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's been a while since I've heard KAC testify. So could you refresh us? What is the mission of KAC, please?
We are an advocacy organization for children and families, and we are do a lot of work in different areas. So budget and tax work, as well as health and early learning and food security as well.
All right. So are you an advocacy organization that's in favor of balancing the budget or helping families? Could you clarify?
Yeah, I think one of our concerns, and I think we saw it in 2017, is that when the state legislature has trouble balancing the budget, the people that feel the pinch are low-income families. And so I think it's really important to give families help putting food on the table, but I also am very worried about setting up our state to potentially be in another situation where budget cuts are going to hurt low-income families the most.
All right,
and so I think the
can,
balance of those two things is really important. Sorry.
Excuse me. You can say then that along with opposing any economic development incentives or any spending ever or any ratcheting down of the food sales tax, that you would oppose anything that puts the budget in any sort of danger at all, correct?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, we were in support, we testified in favor of House Bill 2487 previously before the Apex bill was
and so now you oppose it?
And now we're exploring the other options.
So you oppose 2487 now?
I think that we are trying to figure out what is the most responsible fiscal solution moving forward, knowing that Apex has a lot of unknown variables with it.
Okay, I do want to point out to the committee that we are legislators. We have a great deal of unknown variables. We could be at nuclear war for, who knows? All kinds of different things can happen. I think that it is appropriate for organizations who are advocating for certain things to focus on those things and not to speculate. Very disappointed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, are there any further questions? Seeing none, I do want to apologize to Mr. Stuart Little. He was listed as a in-person proponent. I'd like to welcome him up to step up and address the committee. That was my fault. I was looking at the wrong list. So we do have one final proponent.
Well, I'm glad you all have used up all your questions, so that's helpful. And I don't mean to slow you down. I'm going to make a couple of points. Stuart Little, I'm appearing today on behalf of the Kansas Food and Farm Coalition. As you can see in my written testimony, that includes KC Healthy Kids, Kansas Food Action Network, and Kansas Rural Center and Harvesters. And we're not tax experts. We're focused on access to food, providing and ensuring that folks have as much access to food, and in particular locally produced food and those kinds of issues. So if this is a buffet of bills, considering what you heard before, and we've got other ones that are up here today, we are in favor of eliminating the sales tax on food immediately. If the will of the body is to phase that in, we're supportive of that, but ideally it would be to get it off the books right now, because anybody who's been around here more than 1 year knows that things change very much in 1 year. So I'd make that point. We're supportive of the early implementation deadline. For example, in 2720, we are supportive of continuing of the refundable food sales tax, but I appreciate the back and forth there. Ideally, you eliminate it and you take that off the table. The one issue that I wanted to raise was in the governor's proposal, has to do with an important part of the work that this coalition does, the sales tax on farmers markets that was in the other bill. We would love to see if you all debate one of these bills and you're picking and choosing how you want to put this together. We hope you would include that. We believe that is an important benefit, particularly in the changes in local agriculture and how people are shopping for food and those kind of things. In the last couple of years, it's a very different terrain, and having the food, the farmers markets included in that would be a benefit. I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
All right, now committee, I'll open it up again for questions if we have any questions for this conferee. Seeing none. Oh, Representative Bergkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a question for you first. I missed this earlier on. Was candy bottled water included or excluded in this bill?
In the bill draft,
or the
it
intention,
is excluded. It was my intention, and I miscommunicated with the reviser to have that included. Okay. So that will be an amendment. If 2711 is the bill that the committee works, that will be a change that will be made.
Okay. Now I have a question for Mr. Stewart here. So kind of on that note, I guess if we're looking at options here as far as cutting, sales tax on different food items, I've listened to, I guess, Emily's testimony and yours, and I guess you represent KC Healthy Kids. So if we had to completely eliminate the food sales tax, but we couldn't do it on certain items, I guess, would you be a proponent of that? Or Are there, I guess, certain items that you think should be or excluded when it comes to?
Well, I would say items, I don't know, and to the extent to which kind of the conversation about SNAP benefits and how that may get us out of streamlined sales tax. I mean, you don't want to do anything that disrupts that. And I don't know, I couldn't give you an articulated list of things to be in or out. I would note that from our perspective, we testified in here on the earlier bills, and then on the Senate side, and the one that we did not support was the one that added restaurant. The restaurant food, just because I think that's a completely different beast, and that's a whole different way of thinking about this. And so that's kind of the distinction that we would have drawn between what was in there. I would note when you raise that question, part of the appeal for the farmers market language that I'd suggested was there are kind of component parts of agriculture that are coming to a farmer's market that would not be like a consumable food, but would be part of that I think in the definition that was in the bill the governor submitted is part of why we're suggesting the benefits of that language. But otherwise, itemizing what should you don't want me making those choices.
Okay, no worries. Thank you.
No.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for that testimony. Committee, we have other written proponent testimony to consider. At this time, we'll move on to neutral testimony on House Bill 2711 and welcome first Travis Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Travis Lowe here from the Braden Heiner Lowe & Associates firm here today representing Economic Lifelines. Economic Lifelines is a coalition of private businesses, chambers of commerce, local units of government, and trade associations that support transportation investment that are here in Kansas. We appreciate the opportunity to be here as a neutral conferee for this bill. You may recall we were provided remarks earlier in the session on the earlier versions of food tax proposals, and we want to reiterate the same message. We're not here to discuss what the exact definition of food should be, what the specific rate that this committee and your counterpart committee in the Senate should arrive toward the end of the session. Our request was to bring awareness to the committee about the state highway fund and the designated percentage of sales tax fund, the total state sales tax fund that makes its way to the state highway fund. We are pleased to report that we've heard a lot of good feedback from the committee over the last few weeks. We appreciate the chair and the folks of this committee for this bill because it does reduce or it does adjust the percentage on the top of page 16 of the bill from 16 or to 16.15% to the 17.61%, which makes that adjustment. It's our understanding for the top 3% on the initial change. So we do see that as an improvement of the bill. We do understand that we are still further in the process, but this still bill could be subject to amendments or could be other vehicles move forward, and certainly the process with the Senate. We do ask, though, that there is further consideration as it pertains to the ratchet system. We understand that that does have a fiscal note for the state highway fund, which is noted, I believe, on page 2 of the department's note as well. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions. We do appreciate your continued support for the state highway fund. Thank you.
Thank you, committee. And again, we will hear from all the conferees in the neutral and then take questions. Next, I have listed Michael White with the Kansas Contractors Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Michael White, Executive Director of the Kansas Contractors Association. You just heard from Travis. I won't reiterate anything that he has said. Obviously, we appreciate the amendment that is included in this bill. We do want to point out that it does not adjust if the 3 years, and I'll just say 3 years, it would allow for, I believe, a 1.2% reduction per year. There's not an adjustment. By my rough calculations, and I know we would have time to look at this, that's about another percent that over the 3 years, if it ratchets down to 0, that we would need to adjust. If we want to keep the highway fund whole, you'd have to adjust it about 1% over those 3 years is kind of my rough calculation. But again, we can look at that as we move forward. I will say we do appreciate the attempt with this bill, the intent of the bill to gradually bring down the food sales tax. I think anybody that's got funding with the state budget, I think a lot of it's been mentioned here today. Obviously, you guys always have that, review every year. And there are always every year a lot of unknowns with the state budget. And so at the end of the day, Travis is correct. We're not going to weigh in on whether you eliminate it, do a full elimination, or gradually bring it down. But we do think there's some value in looking at that gradual reduction. And then from my association standpoint, we really appreciate the effort in putting back money in the Budget Stabilization Fund. We think some of the big budget things that the Appropriations Committee is looking at in terms of budget stabilization balances, reduction of debt, and those types of things will really help stabilize the budget as we move forward. And so we appreciate that the reduction in future years is tied to some level of budget stabilization fund balance. So with that, Mr. Chairman, at the right appropriate time, I'll stay for questions.
Thank you. Our last neutral conferee would like to welcome Haley Cutler with Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, and I believe she is on WebEx.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, members of the House Committee on Taxation. My name is Haley Cutler. I'm a campaign director for Kansas Appleseed Center for Law and Justice. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to the belief that Kansans working together can build a state full of thriving, inclusive, and just communities. I have the privilege to work on our anti-hunger team at Kansas Appleseed. We are 4 strong across the state. We have some colleagues in Holcomb, Kansas, in Pickaway, which is near Iola, and then some colleagues based in Wichita. Just to go over both bills, Kansas Appleseed supports House Bill 2720 and is neutral on House Bill 2711, and solely because we know that Kansans need relief right now, which is why we're neutral. Ending the state sales tax on groceries would help Kansans purchase the food that they need. We know that addressing hunger in Kansas is more essential now than ever as food insecurity has grown in the wake of COVID-19. It really is urgent for Kansans to receive these savings as soon as possible. Current food assistance programs are helping, but they're not enough. While those receiving assistance through SNAP purchased with those dollars, these programs are only meant to supplement recipients' current food budget. Because SNAP only covers a portion of most families' grocery bills, the other part is still taxed at the 6.5%, limiting their ability to buy more nutritious food for themselves and their families. Ending grocery sales tax will not solve hunger in Kansas, but it will help fill the gap. In the breadbasket of the world, we know that no one should be going hungry, and yet 1 in 8 Kansans are. In some areas of the state, that number is 1 in 6 Kansans. The Kansas food sales tax is a regressive burden for Kansas families, and it's past time for us to act. As food prices continue to rise, as I know other folks have mentioned today, and our rural grocery stores are struggling, it's essential to eliminate the food sales tax as an investment in Kansas families. Thank you so much, and I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, committee, I have double checked my list this time. I believe that is all our neutral conferees, and we will now take questions. Representative Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony. And I was reading other testimony from other proponents for this bill. And one of the questions I have to you is, when I was reading it, they were talking about SNAP and that it really, I'm going to quote, this doesn't really help the 213,000 people on food stamps. Is that a correct statement, or I'm hearing something differently from you? Could you expand a little bit?
Absolutely. We have many colleagues that were proponents, and we are neutral just because we believe, that we should do it now. This would still help SNAP families families on SNAP because it really is a supplemental program. And so we know when we're talking to families, a lot of SNAP dollars only last just a couple weeks throughout the month. And so then the families are not using their EBT card. They're paying out of pocket for the rest of their groceries. And so we believe in that regard, ending the food sales tax is important for all Kansans. Did that help answer your question? Thank you.
Mic back on. Thank you very much. That helps.
Committee, further questions? Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So can you give us the dollar thresholds for SNAP program recipients?
That's a great question. I don't have them on my screen because they go household by household number, but I can surely get those for you after this committee hearing.
So on a follow-up to that, I checked my W-2 I got from the state and I qualified this year. So I guarantee you the number is pretty low. So thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You don't qualify. A family of four, it's $28,548 a year or less. And the maximum benefit for that family is $2.29 per person per meal. So that's what they receive. So anything more than that, they have to buy groceries, the supplement, and the food sales tax.
Further questions, committee? If not, I have a couple. Haley, one for you is you mentioned in your testimony that Kansans are needing this right now. Do you have a specific group of Kansans that you're talking about? Or are you generally referring to just all Kansans? Well, oops, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. 2 years into the pandemic and I still can't figure out that mute button. I think in our testimony we were talking about all Kansans, but I will say, our team focuses most on, we're an anti-poverty organization, and that's the campaign that I am a part of. And so we are talking about income Kansans, and ending the food sales tax will help. I know we were just talking about the SNAP numbers, and $2.29 meal per person is not a lot of money. So we know that this will help all Kansans, but for our organization specifically, we work with a lot of low-income folks.
Right. And the reason I bring that up is because as I heard testimony and I heard comments from constituents after we heard the first two bills, is I agree. We need to take it to zero immediately, but for the people that need it the most, which is why I attempt to do that with this bill by making the food sales tax credit refundable. They are still paying that small 3.5, but then they get it back. So ultimately, I'm trying to get it to zero immediately for lower income families, seniors, disabled people, everyone that would qualify for the food sales tax credit. Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would love to talk to Haley, but are we asking other persons also? I would like to ask Mr. White to come up, please. Thank you, Mr. White, and thank you for your testimony. A question I have, you mentioned about the adjustment in order to keep the state highway fund whole. And I'm reading some opponent testimony here that brings up the same question. So is what you're saying, if we did this in a phased process, we would have to make that adjustment each year to keep the state highway fund whole?
Yeah, correct. So if you remember, the governor's bill had adjusted the sales tax. It adjusted the sales tax on the state highway fund up to about 18.22%. So made up that full amount. This bill takes it to, I think, 17.16, if I remember right. And that's where it stops, this bill. So if the future reductions happened, we would want to see that additional percent adjusted as it was reduced. So you're talking roughly, in rough numbers, about 1% over those 3 years, if it was reduced.
Okay, and so it would be incumbent upon this committee and this body to do that every year for 3 years, 4 years, however long it took. We would have to, assuming the same people are here, we would have to do that again every year to maintain the state highway fund?
Yeah, what we would suggest is we amend this bill, that it would automatically make those adjustments. So as the sales tax ticks down, it would adjust that percent up. That would be our suggestion, that we amend the bill to do that, so that the legislature doesn't have to review it again. But if you don't add that amendment, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Helgerson.
Mike. Sorry. Mr. White, let's go back. When the highway bill was passed, the department and you calculated how much money that would be coming in every year. Since that time, we've had the federal government pass a highway bill. We've had the governor and almost all legislators have embraced the idea of doing away the extraordinary transfers out of the highway fund. All of that has brought additional money to the highway fund. First part of the question is, have you calculated how much additional money that would be above and beyond what was passed by the legislature?
So I think my interpretation when this legislature passed Ike was that all those transfers were included. So I think the $9.9 billion plan that you guys passed included all of those transfers coming back. So in my estimation, and I think the department would agree with me, I don't want to speak for the department, but I think the department would agree that Ike was passed predicated on all those dollars coming back and that we would receive the sales tax. So that part of it, I believe, is what was passed in Ike. Now, you are correct. Since Ike passed, the federal government has passed the IIJA bill. As we stand here today, that has not been funded, as you all know. They're doing continuing resolutions, but they're not funding the increase of that IIJA bill. So the only federal dollars currently coming into the system are what was there at the time Ike was passed. Because Ike has always had federal dollars included in it. So in my estimation, the only dollars, if you want to look at what would be increased over what was included in Ike, would only be once they fund the IIJA bill that's currently before Congress now. The bill they passed, if they fund that.
Without exception, I'm sure everybody in this room is supportive of the highway plan and some measure of additional dollars. I know that there was a current question earlier about the idea that we don't have enough funds in order to do the reduction on the sales tax and do everything else out there. And if we get into that discussion, I'll be happy to go through my interpretation. One thing, though, is we could always delay the implementation for 1 year because no one is talking about in the legislature that this could actually be a one-time blip of almost $2.7 billion additional dollars that have come in 1 year's time. That has never happened in the state before. Let me restate that. We have gotten $2.7 billion additional revenue from the time that I did that 2% reduction to now. And we have never had that kind of increased revenue to the state coffers in my 40-year history. And I can't find anybody who's ever seen this kind of an increase. And one thought that's coming in my mind is, both on the spending and the tax side, is maybe we'd be prudent to delay some of these big tax and spending ideas for 1 year so we see how this stabilizes for a year. And, you know, the other part of it for you in particular is maybe we should get to a point where we say, this is what you're going to get, regardless of what the sales tax goes up or goes down. We just said highway fund is going to get the amount thing, this X number of dollars every year from now on. And plan on it accordingly. Now, you can answer now, or we can get into the discussion later, but all of this is kind of going to get wrapped around when we try to balance everything. So you can comment if you want, or.
Well, I think I would ask the chairman if he wants me to, talk about an appropriation really is what I think we're dealing here with. But the one thing I want to stress, Representative Helgerson, is it's very difficult for infrastructure planning if you're doing a year-by-year appropriation. It becomes a very difficult planning process. And I understand that point. I've had some other legislators talk to me about that. But I think when you talk to planners, it becomes, these are long-term infrastructure projects that have some requirement that there'll be financing there for them. So but again, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to get into appropriation discussion in your committee unless you want me to.
Let's avoid that right now to any detail extent. But committee, are there any further questions? I just have one since you're still standing up there and you didn't walk away, you missed your chance. Has that rate, the 17.615 that's proposed in the bill, has that rate ever declined over the history? Like, we passed marketplace facilitator that really broadened the base and grew our sales and use tax receipts. Was anything ever adjusted downward to keep the department whole as far as the dollar amount is concerned?
I think that's a fair question, Mr. Chairman, and I can honestly say in my tenure at the KCA that has not happened. I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming, I would think someone could find out, but probably not, would be my guess.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you, conferees, for your testimony, and that concludes our testimony on House Bill 2711. And at this time, we'll open up the hearing on House Bill 2720 and look to the reviser for an overview, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2720 would also decrease the state rate of sales and compensated use tax on food to 0%. And this would commence August 1 of 2022, excuse me. In this bill, House Bill 2720, food is defined as only those products and those types of food that may be eligible for purchase with supplemental nutrition assistance benefits under the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program issued by the United States Department of Agriculture. So essentially those products that you can buy under that benefit program. And additionally, the city and county-wide retailer sales tax and the sales tax levied by Washburn University would also continue to be levied according to this bill. With that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Siebers. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. And Department of Revenue, if you would please review the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Kathleen Smith with the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue is estimating that House Bill 2720 would decrease state revenues by $402.5 million in fiscal year 2023, $492.2 million in fiscal year 2024, and $501.5 million in fiscal year 2025. And again, just like the last one, we are making the assumption that collections from the sales of food are estimated to be 15% of sales tax collections. And the way this bill is written, it would put the state of Kansas out of compliance with the streamlined agreement based upon the definition of food and based upon the start date. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. So that 15% remains the same, even though the definition is a little bit different. It's kind of negligible.
That is correct.
Okay, yes. Thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Schmidt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathleen, do you have the figures? And I don't know if you have this, but if you remove the prepared food from that estimate, can you give us an idea of what that would be?
Yes, sir, and I don't believe that prepared food is included in here, but I could get you our estimate for prepared food. I don't believe that the SNAP definition includes, per se, prepared food.
Okay, thank you. I may have been misunderstood this then.
Representative Sanders?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathleen, do you know how this fiscal note compares with the fiscal note on 2487?
I do not have that in front of me, but I could make the comparison for you, yes.
Thank you. Are those two bills similar in a lot of ways that would be a valid apples to apples comparison?
I can't remember what 2487 is. I apologize, but I think this is the 2720 is the only bill that is using the SNAP definition for food.
Mr. Chairman, do you have any clarity on that?
We can go back and review that, but let's
Okay.
just focus on this bill for right now. Representative Highland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathleen, I'm reading here that puts out confirmation. Is that no longer conform to the agreement? Is that because of the SNAP definition?
Yes, it is, Representative Highland. So we would need to adopt the definition of food and food ingredients from the streamlined agreement. That was one compliance issue. And then the begin date, we need to begin on a calendar quarter. And this is beginning on August 1 versus a calendar quarter.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Committee, any further questions for Department of Revenue? Seeing none, thank you, Kathleen. We will now open up our proponent section for House Bill 2720 and welcome first to committee, Rabbi Morty Reber. And I hope I pronounced that correctly.
You were in the neighborhood. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gardner, members of the committee. I'm Rabbi Moti Reber. I'm the executive director of Kansas Interfaith Action. We're a statewide faith-based advocacy organization that works on a number of important justice issues, and we're standing in support of HB 2720. I'll let you look at my written testimony for the number of organizations that we represent, but it's many mainline Christian as well as Jewish and Muslim communities. So one of our major issue areas is poverty and economic justice. And so what that means in a principle is that most of the burden of paying for society, for society's needs is borne by those who have the ability, more of the ability to pay, those who have gleaned more of life's financial blessings. So the food sales tax is the opposite of that. It's regressive tax, which means it falls disproportionately on people who spend more of their money on food. So that means the tax burden is greater on those who have less. And that's backwards. As it's been pointed out, the sales tax in Kansas is the second highest in the nation. So another issue that was mentioned in the earlier testimony was food insecurity, the number of 1 in 8 Kansans worrying about having enough money to put food on the table. That is directly contributed to by the high food sales tax because it makes food more expensive. For years, we've been, KIFA, Kansas Interfaith Action, has been putting off talking about eliminating the food sales tax because of the delicate financial situation that the state was in. Now that we're in somewhat of a less delicate financial situation, we think the time has come to address this issue. And the reason why we're testifying on this bill is because we do advocate for a full elimination of this food sales tax. I know that people are concerned about how the Apex bill or some other concerns will impact state revenues, but I want to sort of say that maybe it's time to put poor and working people first in this calculation. And if we do need to raise revenue in some other way or to readdress about an imbalance, which doesn't exist right now, but could in the future, if we need to readdress it, let's figure out a way to readdress it that doesn't fall strictly on the back of the least among us. This is the best, this bill, this issue, elimination of food sales. I do believe that a ratchet will not ratchet. I think the question was raised earlier about what the conditions would be that would cause a further ratchet from the initial decrease, and I don't know that we would ever see that. I think you have to assume that if something is meant to happen in stages that it won't, based on previous experience. I do think that this bill, or this principle of the elimination of the food sales tax, has bipartisan support, which is great. I do think it's the best step that the legislature can take to help people address food insecurity and help their food bills go farther. So I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next, we have listed Travis Kier, but it was my understanding he may not be available. Are you joining us, or are you available on WebEx? If not, we will move right along, and perhaps he can join us later. Next conferee is Richard Reiswick with Jamboree Foods via WebEx. Can you hear us?
Hello, Mr. Chair. Dennis Nicholson, AV team. He was on the WebEx just now. I believe he unmuted himself and he might have accidentally left the meeting, but I'll let you know when he comes back.
Okay. We will go on to the next conferee, Brittany McAllister. Is she available on WebEx?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. We can hear you loud and clear.
Wonderful. Mr. Chair and Tax Committee, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide comment in support of removing the food sales tax on behalf of the National Service Office for Nurse Family Partnership. Over the last decade, our NFP program has partnered with Kansans to provide a public health nursing intervention that is designed to improve health and economic outcomes for first-time low-income pregnant women and their children. Our program is a community health model that pairs registered nurses with low-income first-time moms to provide visits in the home during their pregnancy and until their child turns 2. Our nurses provide these visits to help moms set goals that improve their health, their children's health, as well as their family's economic self-sufficiency. So 2 important components of this model are ensuring moms have the education they need to make healthy food choices during pregnancy and beyond, and also helping them become self-sufficient to reduce or end the need for reliance on other assistance programs. Removal of the food sales tax for our low-income moms and babies would help these families be able to more easily afford to put healthy foods on the table. And we know that there are many bills under consideration to end the state food tax, and we really support any effort to bring affordability of food to our families. But we do ask that it's done so in a way that provides enough tax base for our local governments to be able to continue to provide services to families, such as Nurse Family Partnership. We empower vulnerable first-time moms to transform their lives and create better futures for themselves and their babies, and we really see legislation to end the food sales tax as part of that mission. So we thank you all for your partnership in that, and I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, and we will take questions at the end of testimony. I think we have Travis on the phone. Is there a phone number that's on there that is muted?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The last 2 digits end in 19. I can unmute this. I can unmute the person.
Let's see if that is Travis. Okay, Travis,
Chairman.
are you there? Yes.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Very good. Sorry about that. I was trying to respond, and I was as frustrated as you were waiting, so I apologize. My name's Travis Kier, and I own grocery stores on the Highway 36 corridor in Washington, Mankato, and Clay Center, Kansas. We've been in business, in the grocery business, since about 1908 and have seen the loss of revenue due to Nebraska's lack of sales tax, well, for as long as I can remember. This has been a real hardship as far as a competitive side. You know, it's pretty difficult to explain to a customer when you start off 6.5% in the hole and you have to go from there. However, you know, there are a lot of people that want to continue to shop and stay. They just want to save. And my point is there's a lot of other revenues that we're missing out by people going to these other communities to shop for food. what other costs are incurred by the loss of revenue in our other towns. You know, they're not just going to buy groceries when they go to a different community. They're stopping at the different stores and everything else that could possibly be revenues for the state of Kansas. And like other people have been saying, we're the second worst taxed food state there is, which is not anything to be proud of. Why are we getting penalized, and why are we penalizing the residents of Kansas and forcing them to go other places rather than to shop and to support our local business? That's why I'm for this 2720 bill that hopefully would keep the revenues in our state versus trying to push our customers to different places to buy food.
Thank you, Travis. Does that complete your testimony?
Yes, sir. In a nutshell.
All right. Thank you so much. And we do have your written testimony in front of us as well. Committee, we also have Haley Cutler again from Kansas Appleseed. Are you still there? Are you wanting to address 2720 specifically, Haley?
I think I addressed everything in my testimony earlier, so I'm all right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing that Mr. Reiswick has joined us online yet. So that does conclude our proponent portion of the testimony, and I will open it up for questions at this time. Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as you know, I am a proponent of this, so I guess maybe I should have listed as a proponent. But I talked to Rich and his, these guys are owner operators, so they're actually operating their stores, and his computer died after being here long enough. So he's probably running a cash register right now. But I think you can see from his written testimony how much he contributes to the state of Kansas. The numbers speak for themselves. One of the things that have been brought up here today is the surrounding states, and I think everybody needs to understand Oklahoma has a bipartisan bill to remove food sales tax. So they'll be causing problems for the merchants down the southern border. I think they're right now at 4%, 4.5%, and they're proposing to go to 0. These grocery stores hire a lot of people. They're an industry in those communities unto themselves. They are a job creator. They historically have been a huge part of the communities as these consumers have driven across the state lines, and especially on the Missouri-Kansas line and the Nebraska-Kansas line. That's been a negative impact, a big negative impact on those communities. They talk about the Highway 36 corridor. I will tell you, in talking to the Price Chopper and the hen house operators in Johnson County and all the way down to Ottawa, it's a big impact on them too. Probably a lot more dollars involved there, but there's just a lot more dollars to be had. It is a huge negative impact. We talked about the revenue numbers, and the Appropriations Committee is correct. The numbers are there right now. I will tell you, with what we're seeing on commodity prices, as you know from agriculture, we've never seen them. I don't know when the last time I saw $10 bushel wheat was, but it looks like there's going to be good revenue numbers coming in this next year. The jobs are paying more than they've ever paid that I can remember, and everybody has a job, and those people that want a job that pays better can get one, or maybe even work part-time. So I'm pretty convinced the revenue numbers will be there. I think we're in good shape. I think we're able to afford this at this time. And groceries are something everybody has to buy. So everybody benefits from not having a sales tax on food. You know, we do all kinds of voodoo things with sales tax exemptions and stair-stepping, which I think I got that kind of figured out, but I know you're in game, but I'm not sure how we get there. It's kind of complex there. But I think now's the time to take it to 0. You know, I know in my days in the grocery business, one of the most frustrating things for me was the people who came in and competed with me with those government programs, whether it was the senior center who got commodities, whether it was the school who got commodities, and now this last summer, we had truckloads of groceries show up, no income requirements, anything, just come on down and free food. You know, that's pretty tough when you're in business trying to compete against the government coming in and giving away free food. So sales tax on groceries, I think it's time to take it off. It's a competitive situation. It's a win for everybody. The amount of jobs that will be created by retaining those customers. And when you put 6 and 7% more dollars into their billfold at the cash register, they'll buy more things, and I guarantee those retailers will promote for it, and they'll get us even more business than we had. This will probably end up making us money instead of costing us money. That's the way business is done. You invest your way to prosperity. You don't save your way to prosperity. That ship has sailed. So this is, once again, is an investment of state tax dollars, and that's where I'm at on this. And I hope, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. I served 30-some years in the grocery business, and I can feel the pain of these retailers, and I can tell you from boots on the ground how it works out. The people will certainly drive for 20 to 30 cents a gallon difference on a gallon of gasoline, but it's the same thing on groceries. So I understand everybody having a hard time thinking that it's not that much money. It is that much money. And with that, I'll answer any questions anybody has if you have any. Thank you.
Any questions for our final conferee? Are there any questions, committee?
I have one comment tonight. Can I make a comment?
Yes, Representative Gardner.
I'll get it here. Just a quick comment. And the chairman and I have talked about this, and you know, I go back glide path to zero. Representative Epley, that my bill that I introduced a few years ago, ratcheting it down over time. I think we have the money. I think we ought to do it. We ought to set it at zero. And one of the things I'm concerned about in 2711, and I've talked to the chairman about this, is the ratcheting down is relying on $100 million in the sustainability fund or more. And then the department can get with or say, okay, we've met those requirements, let's go down 1.2%. My whole concern with doing that is we're leaving it up to the two senators over in the House, or in the Senate, and two House Appropriations members, because we never get to debate. We never, for the last, I don't know how many years, on the House floor, we get the budget in a conference committee report. So it's up to those four folks that are going to say, should we do sales tax this year or not? And it's all relying upon their actions. And I told the chairman I have a concern about that. I think we ought to be involved, and we ought to be debating that issue to see whether or not, if this bill passes, whether or not we should reduce or ratchet down the sales tax on food. And Mr. Chairman, you'll probably say, bring an amendment then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I wouldn't feel right if I didn't respond to that, Mr. Gardner. But you know, in my analysis of this, trying to look at different ways to accomplish this, if we can't maintain $100 million in our budget stabilization fund, should we be cutting taxes? And you know, I understand what your reasoning is behind the four people conference committee reports. I've shared that frustration as well. Unfortunately, that's the way sometimes the process works. As far as ratcheting it down and trying to maintain that balance, it's just a responsible thing to do. I agree with you 100%. We have the money to do it now. This is a $500 million cut and increases in the out years. Can you guarantee me that we're going to have this money 10 years from now? You know, I sat in this room when I first started in 2017 on tax committee and on K-12 budget committee. I don't know how many hours I spent in this room trying to fix the tax problem and the K-12 budget problem. And I don't want to go back there. That's the only reason I'm trying to be cautious on moving forward. I understand about trying to take it to zero as fast as we can. And that was one of the reasons I tried to do that refundable tax credit, is to get it there for those people that need it the most. But we don't need to debate this right now. It is well after 5. I will ask one final time for further questions. Representative Baker.
Just one final comment real quick. So everybody's getting their property tax statement right now, and my emails are cooking.
The evaluation.
Yeah, the evaluation. Yeah, they know it's coming too. So anyway, my point is, there's a lot of heartburn on those things, and we know those property taxes are going to go up because of the comparison sales and everything. And this bill hopefully will kind of brunt some of that. But I think the bigger question is, we need to sit down and look at all of our tax, whether it's the classifications, the exemptions. We've got, like you said, since 2017, we sit in this committee and we struggle with all this. I think maybe we need to have a reset, and over the next 5 years have a look back and make sure everything is as we intended it to be when we gave those exemptions, and those classifications are where they need to be. But I propose that we step up to that challenge and get something moving on that, because it's broken and it doesn't need to be. Thank you.
Are you volunteering to be tax chairman?
No.
Representative Holgerson, last question. Seeing no further questions, committee, that concludes hearing on House Bill 2720. I do want to let you know, it's my intention tomorrow we have a short hearing, and I'd also like to work House Bill 2571 and 2682. So if you have any amendments or anything you're wanting to prepare on those two bills, we'll try to work through those two short bills. 2571, it's the sales tax refund credit on cars when you sell them privately versus at the dealership. And then House Bill 2682 is the retailer, the city, county retailers sales tax for the city of Latham that we heard earlier, I think a couple of weeks ago. Representative Sanders.
Mr. Chairman, there were a couple of opponents listed. Is that written only?
Oh, yes. Thank you for clarifying that. The neutral and opponent testimony was all written only on that last bill. Seeing no further discussion, we are adjourned. Thank you.